King Charles III made a decision so striking, so deeply personal, that even those closest to the crown were left speechless. He reached into the very heart of his marriage, took a crown long associated with Queen Camilla.
There's a version of this story that circulates constantly on YouTube, the one where King Charles has secretly taken the crown from Camilla and handed it to Catherine, where Camilla makes a final demand and gets rejected, where palace insiders whisper about betrayal behind closed doors. It's a good story. It has villains. It has a rising heroine, and there's just enough real detail mixed in to feel plausible. But almost none of it is true, and the parts that sound most dramatic, the secret meetings, the rejected demands, the quotes from unnamed insiders, do not hold up against what has actually been reported by credible outlets, palace statements, or royal historians. What follows is the real story. It's less cinematic than the rumor mill version, but it is, in its own way, more interesting, because it's about how a 250-year-old institution is actually adapting in real time, told through facts that can be checked rather than lines that were invented to make a thumbnail more clickable. To understand where things stand now, it helps to go back to April 2005, when Charles, then Prince of Wales, married Camilla Parker Bowles at the Guildhall in Windsor. The public mood at the time was frosty. Diana, Princess of Wales, had died less than 8 years earlier, and for much of the British public, Camilla was still associated with the affair that helped end Charles and Diana's marriage. Polling in that period showed real skepticism about Camilla, and the palace was acutely aware of it. That's the context behind an announcement that Clarence House made ahead of the wedding, that when Charles eventually became king, Camilla would be known as Princess Consort rather than Queen. It was framed as a concession to public sentiment, a signal that the monarchy understood it needed to tread carefully. Here's the complication that a lot of more sensational retellings gloss over. There was no legal mechanism to actually enforce that promise. Under long-standing constitutional convention, the wife of a reigning king is queen consort. That's simply how the title works, and it isn't something a press office announcement can override indefinitely. Royal watchers and constitutional commentators noted for years that princess consort was, at best, a courtesy title with no real precedent, and that Camilla was always likely to become queen consort once Charles took the throne, regardless of what had been said in 2005. That's exactly what happened. When Charles acceded in September 2022 following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, Buckingham Palace confirmed that Camilla would be known as queen consort and later, simply Queen. In May 2023, she was crowned alongside Charles at Westminster Abbey in a ceremony that followed centuries of tradition, anointing, crowning, and enthronement conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury. It was a formal, constitutionally unremarkable transition, even though it took 16 years and a change in public mood to get there. So the idea that Camilla was somehow denied a crown she was owed and is now watching get reassigned isn't accurate. She already has it. The real, more nuanced story is about something else entirely. How the palace manages public opinion around two very differently perceived women, and what happens to titles further down the line. It's true that royal watchers and commentators discussed the visual choices at the 2023 coronation, including the fact that only the king and queen wore crowns during the ceremony itself, with other family members, including Princess Charlotte, wearing floral headpieces instead. That a documented detail, and it reflects a real and long-standing tradition. Coronations are, by design, built around the reigning monarch and consort. Every modern coronation has centered the two people actually being crowned, not the wider family, and that was true in 1953 for Elizabeth II as well. What isn't documented is any credible claim that this was a deliberate strategy to extinguish Catherine's popularity or diminish her on purpose. It's worth being skeptical of any narrative that reads elaborate psychological motives into standard ceremonial protocol. Coronations are governed by ecclesiastical and constitutional tradition first, and stage-managed family politics a distant second, if at all. Where the popular narrative gets closer to something real is in the numbers. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has consistently polled as one of the most popular working royals for years, and recent tracking confirms that hasn't changed. YouGov's ongoing royal favorability tracker has repeatedly placed William and Catherine at or near the top of the list of living royals, with positive ratings in the mid to high 70s through late 2025 and into 2026. A YouGov update from around what would have been Queen Elizabeth II's 100th birthday in April 2026 showed William at 76% and Catherine at 75% positive, both comfortably ahead of King Charles, who sat at 60%, and well ahead of Camilla, whose favorability numbers have been lower and, according to YouGov's own January 2026 tracker, trending downward, with only around 42% of Britons viewing her positively at that point. That gap is real. It's been consistent for years, and it isn't a secret or scandal. It's simply a function of how differently the two women are perceived by the public, for reasons that go beyond anything Charles has engineered. Camilla's public image has always been shaped by the circumstances of how her relationship with Charles became public knowledge during his marriage to Diana. Decades of goodwill building, patronages, and steady public service have moved her image in a positive direction over time, but she has never fully closed the gap with the Waleses, and polling suggests she's unlikely to. Catherine's popularity, mean what's worth noting, isn't just inherited or default. Much of her standing over the past 2 years has been shaped by how she handled a genuine personal health crisis in full public view. In March 2024, Catherine announced in a video message that she had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing what she described as preventative chemotherapy, following abdominal surgery earlier that year that had initially been described as non-cancerous. She stepped back from public duties for several months. Her return began gradually. A low-key appearance at Trooping the Color in June 2024, then an appearance at the Wimbledon men's final in July, where she received a standing ovation. In January 2025, Catherine announced on social media that she was in remission, thanking the Royal Marsden Hospital, where she'd received treatment, and describing the adjustment to new normal as something that takes time. She has been candid in follow-up comments about the reality of recovery, telling people during a hospital visit that it had been a difficult period and that healing isn't a straight line, even after treatment formally ends. In February 2026, she released a personal message for World Cancer Day, describing the experience in her own words as one with moments of fear and exhaustion, alongside moments of strength, kindness, and profound connection. A message that came a day after King Charles, who has also spoken publicly about his own cancer diagnosis and treatment, shared his. By 2026, Catherine had resumed a full public schedule, including her first international trip since entering remission, a visit to Reggio Emilia in Italy focused on early childhood education, a cause she has championed for years through her foundation work. Palace aides described it as a significant personal milestone, as much as professional one. None of this needed palace intervention or strategic promotion to generate public sympathy and respect. It happened because a highly visible public figure went through something relatable, handled it with unusual openness for a royal, and the public responded to that openness. That a more grounded explanation for her popularity than any theory involving secret succession planning. There's a real pattern worth discussing here, separate from invented quotes. Charles has, at various points, made public gestures that support William and Catherine's standing, appointments, joint engagements, and public acknowledgement of their role as the future king and queen. That's not unusual or scandalous. It's the ordinary business of preparing an heir and his family for eventual succession, something every modern monarch has done to some degree. Whether that amounts to some kind of deliberate campaign to sideline Camilla is speculative and not something that's been confirmed through any verifiable palace source. It's more accurate to describe it as standard succession planning happening alongside, not instead of, Charles' support for his wife. This is the part of the story that doesn't require any speculation at all, because it's simply how the system works. When Prince William eventually becomes king, Catherine will automatically become queen consort, the same title Camilla now holds. That's not a reward being granted to her for good behavior or popularity. It's the constitutional default for the wife of a reigning king, exactly as it was for Camilla. What happens to Camilla's title at that point is a genuinely open question, and it's one that has a real historical precedent worth looking at. After King George VI died in 1952, his widow Elizabeth became known as Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, specifically to distinguish her from her daughter, the new Queen Elizabeth II, a title that made sense because she was a new monarch's mother. Camilla is not William's mother, so that specific title wouldn't apply to her. The more likely precedent is the historical title Queen Dowager, traditionally used for the widow of a king who is not the mother of the current monarch. Whether the palace will actually use that title, revive an older form, or create something new hasn't been decided or announced, because Charles remains on the throne, and this simply isn't a live decision yet. Any claim about a final demand from Camilla being formally rejected by the palace is not something reported by any credible outlet. It's invented detail dressed up as inside information. It's worth sitting with the actual polling picture for a moment, because it tells a story on its own without needing embellishment. Recent YouGov tracking shows a consistent hierarchy. William and Catherine at the top among living royals, Princess and close behind in the high 60s to 70% range, Charles in the 60% range, and Camilla trailing further back. Interestingly, the same polling has also shown that the late Queen Elizabeth II and Diana, Princess of Wales, remain more positively regarded in retrospect than any living royal, a reminder that nostalgia plays a real role in how the British public rates the monarchy, and that comparisons to the past shape present-day opinion more than any single family decision does. None of this is a crisis for the institution. YouGov's broader tracking has also consistently found that a majority of Britons, around 6 in 10, want to keep the monarchy, and a similar share think it's good for the country. Camilla's comparatively lower personal popularity hasn't translated into broader unpopularity for the monarchy itself, which is an important distinction the more sensational retellings tend to erase entirely. It's worth asking why a story like Charles took Camilla's crown and gave it to Catherine spreads at all, given how little of it holds up. Part of it is structural. Royal content performs extremely well on platforms like YouTube, and stories with a clear conflict, a villain losing status, a rising star being favored, tend to outperform more measured explainers about constitutional convention. Real numbers, like polling gaps or title mechanics, get dressed up with invented emotional beats, private tears, secret ultimatums, palace shouting matches, because those details are what make a video feel like it's revealing something rather than just reporting it. The irony is that the real version of the story doesn't need embellishment to be compelling. A queen who took nearly 2 decades to earn even partial public acceptance. A princess who turned a private health crisis into one of the most openly human moments the modern monarchy has ever produced. A 1,000-year-old institution quietly working out, in real time and largely in public view, how titles and public expectations will shift once again when the crown eventually passes to William. That a genuinely interesting story about how a hereditary institution adapts to modern celebrity culture, polling, and social media. It just doesn't need a fabricated final demand or an invented insider quote to be worth telling. To be clear about what remains genuinely uncertain, rather than manufactured, nobody outside the family and a small circle of aides knows what formal title Camilla will eventually carry once William is king, because that decision hasn't been made publicly, and there's no indication it needs to be made anytime soon given Charles's ongoing reign. Camilla's exact future living arrangements and public role after any future transition are similarly undecided in any way that's been publicly confirmed. Reporting on the relationship dynamics within the family beyond documented public appearances and official statements is, by nature, speculative, since the individuals involved rarely comment on their private relationships with